Welcome to the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, woodworking with an Appalachian flair.
This is Jerill with the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, bringing you another shop tip. Some of you that notice nicks in the stainless steel blades or cuts in the carbide tip blades think that that may have been caused by metal, either a nail or screw, and that's not always the case. A lot of times, especially with carbide tipped cutters, that can be caused by a knot. Carbide is very brittle, so it breaks easily. So if your cutters happen to hit a knot, it can break the blade. So what you as a woodworker need to do, you need to educate yourself on the different types of knots. There are 5 types of knots. Some educators believe there are 7 types of knots. I'll give you all 7 and you can determine whether there are 5 or 7. Now, one of the type of knots is called a cluster knot. And that's where there is several small knots close together that form a cluster. So that's one type of knot. Another is called a spike knot. And that is where at the sawmill the knot is cut in half lengthwise. So what you have is a very long knot that looks like a spike instead of a round or oval knot. Then you come to the knots that you really need to know. One is called an intergrown knot. And this is where the tree was cut and there was a living branch on the tree, and then the branch was cut off and then the log was milled. So a living knot, the wood fibers are actually grown around the pith of the limb. So it is a solid knot. It is good. It may split when it dries, but it is solid. And a lot of people consider those artistic. So those are good knots. Then you have what's called an encased knot. And this is where a limb on a living tree gets torn off, falls off, dies. And then as the tree grows, it grows around that knot. So when the log is milled, what you have is a knot that is dead. And usually those become loose, and those are the ones you need to be concerned about. Another type of knot is called a decayed knot, and that is where the limb is dead and the tree grows around it. And the knot, after it is milled, is very punky and very soft. So you need to be concerned with those ones. The other 2 types of knots that some educators say exist and some don't. One is called an open knot, and basically that's where the knot is gone and all you have is a knot hole. And then the other is a pin knot. And a pin knot is where you have a very, very small branch starting on a tree, and it gets broke off, and then the tree continues to grow around that and grow. So for another 20, 30 years, and then when that tree is cut and milled, way in the middle of it, there will be a very, very small pin knot. And a lot of educators consider that a separate type of knot. Some educators consider that the same thing as an encased knot. So, and of course an open knot, some educators don't consider that a knot because what you have is a hole where the knot was. So you need to know these type of knots, and the reason you need to know these type of knots is when you're machining and the cutters hit the knot, whether it be a table saw, a shaper, a joiner, a planer, a miter saw, it doesn't matter. When your cutters hit that knot, you need to be confident that that knot is not going to come loose and go flying out. If it's in a planer, it is contained within the head and then goes out through the dust collection system. But if it's on a table saw or a shaper or a miter saw, then it can become a projectile and go flying through the air. So that's not good. So you need to know the type of knots, and you need to know the hazards associated with those knots. Some knots look good in wood. The intergrown is the one you want if you're wanting to leave a knot in the wood. Be very cautious when you're around cased knots or decayed knots. Those are the ones you really have to pay attention to. So the next time you pick up a board and it has a knot, pay attention to it, decide what kind of knot it is, and then you'll know how to handle it. This is Jerill Vance with the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop reminding you, be proud of your Appalachian heritage.